We're back. Did you know if you're trying to use one of these little lapel mics and you have a crazy beard, it can interfere with the sound? Does anyone even care about entertainment right now? If it's not strictly talking about politics? Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Nick Langan with Sixpence Productions. It's been a little while. We had a baby born, happy and healthy, but as you can imagine, free time becomes a bit of a luxury, and these videos are just made in free time. We're still working away on a couple projects. We've had some developments with one, but I can't really talk about it, as is always the case with these types of things. You never say anything specific until the money's in the bank and the ink is dry. So if you are supporting us, even just through prayer, we'd appreciate it. I have had some time to catch up on some viewing, though, and I thought I'd just make a quick video talking about two shows that I just watched, both by the same guy, or team, and writer and director. Um, the first was Midnight Mass, which came out a couple years ago, and the second was The Fall of the House of Usher, both by Mike Flanagan, who also, I think, wrote and directed the Doctor Sleep movie, which I really actually liked. And both on Netflix. I think both funded through Netflix. Both ostensibly are horror shows, although we're going to talk about that as part of this video. I just think it's a really good example of what to do and what not to do when trying to make anything, but specifically things that explore maybe controversial, deep themes, things like that. I have always liked horror elements in things. When we play games, fantasy games, and role playing games, I certainly like to add horror elements. When I write, there's often elements or scenes that feel very much like a horror movie or book. I'm working on a book right now that's probably the most straight horror thing that I've ever done. But I don't love the genre as it currently is done in films and TV and stuff like that. I just finished reading the horror stories from The King in Yellow, which was interesting. Those are some older short stories that inspired Lovecraft. I like Lovecraft's writing. And if you know me at all, you know I really like Robert E. Howard, who was a contemporary of Lovecraft, and they were friendly, professionally at least. And Howard's writing with Conan the Barbarian and Solomon Kane, there's tons of horror elements, although there are some key differences between him and Lovecraft, which I'll get to in a minute. And so I like elements of that. I don't like the modern trend for jump scares and cheap kind of thrills like that. Don't love a lot of horror movies in particular where you have protagonists that are just dumb. It's become a genre cliche and joke. The idea of a bunch of teenagers that are just completely inept and they're just getting slaughtered one by one. And I don't think that horror needs to include excess gore. If it serves a story, fine. Sometimes, though, I feel like most modern horror relies heavily on jump scares and gore. That's it. And to me, those things are not frightening at all. They're not. They're not scary. Even if you jump a little bit at the jump scare, you're reacting in the same way that you might flinch if something flew into your face, right? If you're sitting working and a bug suddenly flies right by your face and you weren't expecting it, you might blink and react. Does that mean you're terrified of the bug? Is there any actual dread there? No, you were just surprised, and it's a natural reaction. I think the jump scare thing is cheap, and I don't really care for it. I was looking for things to watch while I was sitting up at night feeding, rocking a baby. And I had been interested in Midnight Mass, but I had just not gotten around to it. So I put that on, and I really enjoyed it. I'm going to try and avoid any huge spoilers, although these shows have been out for a little while, just in case you get interested and you want to go check it out, either one of them. I watched Midnight Mass over the course of a week. 7 episodes, about an hour long each. And the premise is that this young man who was involved in a DUI accident where somebody died, he goes to prison, and he comes back to his small community. It's a small fishing island, Crockett Island, and it is, population less than 200 sort of deal. This very small, isolated setting. And he comes back to stay with his family as he's trying to figure out how to get on his feet. And the town is very religious. It's a Roman Catholic predominantly town. he has he has lost his faith given what he's been through and what he's seen between the accident and then being in prison. And the main character is Riley, I believe. He's one of our main characters. And then around the same time that he comes back, the 80-year-old priest and pastor of the local Catholic Church on the island, he has got fallen ill, and this new younger priest, probably in his 30s, shows up, and he seems to be very charismatic. He's very on fire, and he's church attendance starts going up, but at the same time, weird stuff starts happening around the island, and that's about all I'll say uh, as far as the plot. I don't want to spoil that one. But I watched this and I really liked it. It felt very much like a good Stephen King type story. Say what you want about King as a person, and certain things are disturbing in the wrong sort of way in his book. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just look up some of the more disturbing things that are in it that aren't related to the monster or horror at all. It felt very much like that. A slower burn, almost like a 7-hour movie with good characters. Several, we have a truly diverse cast of characters, and the horror really serves as a more of a backdrop for what's going on with these people psychologically. There are some violent scenes and whatnot, but really we're exploring who these people are, and we explore all sorts of things. We get into the psychology in the show of religious fanaticism, doing the wrong thing, thinking for the right reasons, what happens when you die, the faith, and it never felt disrespectful at all. It handled the idea of religion and faith respectfully. As I said before, the main character is agnostic, maybe atheist when he comes back, but it doesn't portray religion as a whole in a negative light the same way that certain things would and a simpler show would, which I appreciated. I never felt that it was being disrespectful. I never rolled my eyes during any of the stuff with Midnight Mass. Side note, Midnight Mass also has a villain that I have not wanted to see a villain get their comeuppance, die horribly on screen in a long time, the way that I was waiting for something to finally deal with this person. So hats off to the show. And so the show is really strong. It takes time to get started. There's weird stuff going on, but there's not too many jump scares. There's a few, and I think the ones that there are well deserved and well placed. There's a bunch of great characters. You're rooting for a lot of these people. Even when some of them do less than stellar things, you still like them. You want them to succeed. You can kind of see where most of these people are coming from. The dialogue is very well written. Some people complained. I looked up some reviews and stuff after I watched it. Some people complained there's lots of long talks and monologues. We get some of the priest's homilies, right? We get some of that. It's not exact. It's very artistic. It's not exactly the way that people have a conversation. But dialogue generally is not exactly how people have a conversation, whether you're talking about a book or a movie or TV show. Dialogue is a simulation of a conversation. And so in this case, much like Shakespeare, is not how people talked, and yet you can listen to a Shakespeare monologue or interchange and be very moved if it's performed well because the language is beautiful and things like that. Some of the monologues in this show, I'm thinking of two in particular, are extremely moving and well done. Setup and payoff is excellent, and even though about halfway through the series you kind of see what's going to happen, that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's this idea, I think, in a lot of modern art that you have to subvert expectations in order to be cool, and that's not correct, right? If you think about Brandon Sanderson, who's a great fantasy author, uses this analogy, and I think it's good. If you are going into your 16th birthday and all the signs lead up to the fact that your mom and dad are going to buy you your first car because you're getting your license, and then on the day of your birthday they give you a Matchbox car, your expectations have been subverted, but not in a good way. You're not going to be happy with that subverting of expectations. Sometimes it's okay, and a lot of times I think it's okay and preferable to set up a solid story and to set the expectation and to meet the expectation. And now, if you can exceed the expectation, even better, right? If you can meet what people thought, but then give them extra, which I think kind of is how Midnight Mass is, that's the best because they're going to be satisfied and you're giving them more, right? If going back to the car analogy, if you get the car that you're looking for your 16th birthday, or you get a car, and not only is it a car, but it's a really nice car, now it's double, right? It's a bonus. Not only do you have your own vehicle, but it's maybe a higher quality thing than you thought you were going to get. I think that the show works really well. Then I watched The Fall of the House of Usher, which is, I think, the most recent show. It's also a Netflix show. It's 8 episodes. And it I was curious about it because I really liked Midnight Mass. I like the Doctor Sleep movie. So now I'm like, okay, I want to see what else Mike Flanagan can do here. And I was curious about the premise growing up around Baltimore and the premise of this show being a sort of modern supernatural thriller, crime, drama thing, sort of, that took modern interpretations and cues from Edgar Allan Poe's short stories and writings and stuff. I thought was really interesting. Oh, okay, that's something different. And the show looks great. It's acted very well, just like Midnight Mass was. But the I was disappointed to see a lot of the modern horror tropes, ironically, in The Fall of the House of Usher, which is really less of a horror story than Midnight Mass is. Midnight Mass is a very, in some ways, classic horror story with a certain kind of monster that's doing certain kind of things, and I don't want to spoil anything else. The Fall of the House of Usher is not really a classic horror story in that it revolves around this family that they're these wealthy pharmaceutical tycoons, tycoons, who have seemed to have this supernatural protection over the years. The brother and a sister, and the brother has been married a bunch of times and has 6 children. The sister has remained single, but the two of them run this company together, and they're ruthless and they're constantly doing criminal stuff. But then they can't seem to be caught, and so the set up for that show is that the brother is meeting in his old decaying family home with the DA who's been trying to put them away, or the prosecutor that's been trying to put them away for some time, and he's going to give his full confession. And then we get these flashbacks to both the late 70s, early 80s, when these guys were coming up, and then also the children of the brother being dispatched in various gruesome ways, all analogous with some kind of Edgar Allan Poe story. As a whole, it just wasn't as good. And it got me thinking about making this video. Why is it not as good? The quality's there. There's some scenes or parts of excellent writing, just like Midnight Mass. It's well shot. It's well acted. It's an interesting idea. But I think there's a couple of key flaws, and I think anybody trying to tell stories can learn from some of these things. And I pick on the Christian movie industry a lot, but in particular, I think the Christian movie industry, even though neither of these is, ostensibly Christian at all, can take some cues from it. So the first thing is likable characters. And I don't just mean charismatic actors, right? A charismatic actor can come into a role, and even though the character has no real substance, a good actor sometimes can elevate poor writing or mediocre writing, can elevate poor characterization or mediocre characterization. I think this is a silly example, but the Scorpion King movie, the first one with The Rock, before they made 30 other straight-to-DVD ones. Aside from just being a cheesy, classic Conan-type movie, but not with Conan the Barbarian, one of the things that really makes that movie work is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson himself in the title role. The character is not particularly interesting. If you go back and evaluate it from a story standpoint, he's a sort of stereotypical sword and sandals hero. He wants revenge. He's going to kill the bad guy. He's really strong. He's good at fighting. He's, stoic, kind of stone faced, and that's it. But The Rock is so charming as a person that a lot of that comes across the screen. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about likable characters in that these characters are interesting and well developed, and most of them, in the case of Midnight Mass, have something that you can identify with or like, even if you dislike them overall, right? That's good characterization. That's like what I mean when I say likable characters. There's some of that in The Fall of the House of Usher, particularly with Roderick, who's the brother, the main tycoon that's telling the story and confessing. We're seeing most of it from his perspective. Um, there's some of that. He has, but it's more of the Rock example and less of the good characterization. He is it's Bruce Greenwood, I think, is playing him. It does a very good job and has this sort of magnetic personality on screen. And actually, there's a lot of actors that cross over. There's a lot of actors that were in Midnight Mass that are then in The Fall of the House of Usher. The problem is that whereas in Midnight Mass, we really understand over the course of the series what's motivating most of our main characters, whether it's because they tell us directly, whether it's because it comes up in conversation of other characters, just through actions in some cases. We understand who these characters are, not the actors. And the actors do a good job. So if you have great writing and then you have a great actor, then that actor is going to elevate that writing to phenomenal, right? If you have okay writing and a great actor, well, now maybe the show becomes good, right? In the case of The Fall of House of Usher, I thought it was very uneven, a lot of the characterization. And we don't really ever truly understand motivations for most of our characters. This is something that we see a lot in a lot of faith-based films too. The motivation is nebulous. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel. It just seems like okay, people are saying lines because this is the next thing that has to happen, and this is a really hard thing to avoid, by the way. But so that's the first thing, characterization. The second thing was Midnight Mass is exploring themes. It's exploring themes of death and rebirth and religion and faith and community and all these big themes that it's grappling with. Redemption, obviously, another big one. What does it mean to have eternal life? And because you're putting these themes now with these characters that we understand and like, it becomes really moving for us to watch that and motivate them. Whereas in The Fall of the House of Usher, I'm not sure exactly what the theme is. So you don't really have anybody that you're rooting for because all of the family are pretty terrible people, except for the young granddaughter who's a child and it doesn't have a lot of involvement in what's going on. There's nobody that really has a sense of their actions are trying to drive the story forward. These things are just happening to them because of things beyond their control, right? The comeuppance says come, the bill has come due. And then the theme is, I guess, greed is bad. Okay, but it just seems to pale in comparison in complexity and intellectual depth to something like Midnight Mass or other things. And we see this a lot too, again, with either woke movies or Christian films where it's the theme is kind of boring. Who cares, right? The Lord of the Rings, which is arguably the most Catholic Christian story that isn't from the Bible uh, ever made, both as a book and then as the fantastic Peter Jackson films. It deals with a lot of themes in those movies. You're talking about obviously good versus evil, but then you're talking about temptation and what does the toll, like the price of sin, the ring, right? Friendship, loyalty, corruption, like all these things. Most Christian movies I found that are in the sort of faith-based film industry, and lots of things that are getting put out on Hollywood, lots of things that are getting put out on Netflix or through Hollywood now as well, they don't have that complexity of depth. Now, a good example of a modern movie that did was Dune, and a good example of I'm trying to think what the last Christian film I saw was. But the the depth of theme mixed with characters really drives the narrative forward. Now you don't have to do things this way. There's multiple ways to do story, but it's a good method. So we had likability, but good characterization really is what I mean, I guess. Exploration of themes, and then we have those two things mixed with character action to drive things. In Midnight Mass, like I said, characters are doing things to drive the plot forward. It seems pretty natural. In The Fall of the House of Usher, the characters have no control over themselves. Actually, these things are going to happen no matter what, and it's very difficult to make something like that compelling even with characters that we're rooting for. But in the case of The Fall of the House of Usher, we are 100% not rooting for these characters. They're terrible people. They made a deal with the devil, as it were, and they're getting what is their due. And so I just felt like the whole viewing experience for that fell really flat. So I would recommend, if you're a horror person, if you like tense stories that deal with adult things, if you don't mind a little gore, I would recommend Midnight Mass. I think it's very interesting. I probably wouldn't recommend The Fall of the House of Usher. I thought it was kind of flat, and even though it was sleekly produced and there were some moments that I liked, overall, meh. Um, yeah, that's my recommendation, my thoughts on that. Maybe some helpful notes on the story, just kind of brainstorming. Keep an eye on the channel. We got a few more things that I'm hoping to get out here as we fall into the swing with New Baby. And check the link in our description below, as always, to order your 7 Weeks Coffee. 7 Weeks Coffee is a pro-life coffee company that donate a proportion of all their proceeds to actual pro-life efforts, pregnancy centers and the like. I think they just crossed over $500,000 donated to such causes, and the coffee is also excellent. So get yourself a bag or three down below. If you don't already, follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We're still working on our big project, but and again, we're still working on our big project in the Shadow 5 places. And I can't say too much, but a few other opportunities have popped up for other projects. So I'm hoping to be able to make some announcements. It'd be cool to be able to do it by Christmas. I don't know. We'll see. Uh, Other than that, if you already follow us, please keep us in your prayers. Pray for the country. And until next time, we'll see you later.